Hello, it's me again, and man has it been a good while since my last video on like a full illustration. Today I'm bringing you a summary of my study of this masterpiece of an illustration of Amiya and Ross from Arknife by Min. Been wanting to do this study for a while, and my job hunt has recently finally ended, so now I can. And by now I mean like I finished this study a month ago, and video editing is 10 times more painful. Anyways, some quick things about the channel before I start. Gonna put some old art here as filler material. Gonna try to make more videos again, likely studies on random areas I want to improve on. I'm still very interested in a lot of different styles, so you can reasonably expect some variety in the content. For some of these studies, I might also stream, maybe on the YouTubes or maybe my Twitch, which I don't think anyone except for a few friends know. I've actually got a couple hundred hours of streaming to 0 viewers there, so yeah, very goated. Finally, I am self-taught and do not make a living from art, which is the same as saying that I do not know what I'm talking about, so please take it with a grain of salt and feel free to correct me in the comments. Alright, that's enough rambling, let's begin. Before the sketching, just some overall stuff. This is not too important, but when I first started looking at this piece a little closer, I struggled quite a bit with the perspective as I just couldn't get all the lines to line up, until I realized that I should instead just use the two vanishing points as reference and just tilt the horizon instead of trying to make it work the other way around. Composition wise, these are set up as converging lines to our focal points, as well as the very obvious lighting, color, and detail contrast. I did find it interesting that the sky is apparently really desaturated green. The background is also generally less saturated and with a lower contrast, which I've rather taken a liking to recently. In my own pieces, I tend to achieve it with just more adjustment layers. But this time round, I'm just gonna color pick a little and work from there directly because there's no point making it one way on purpose just so I can change it back later. Alright, sketching. Started out with just putting out some general shapes where I think they should be, then slowly adding in more details, yada yada yada. I didn't really do a good job on the proportions this time, as you will see later. I had to do some interesting overlaying of the original image and perform some transformations. Anyways, after 9 months of job hunting and leak code grinding, I'm just gonna be taking it easy for a while. Honestly, not knowing how to let loose has been a weakness of mine, and not having to worry about every minor detail has made art more enjoyable, which I'm pretty sure is why people do it in the first place. I don't know what I've been doing. Anyways, excuses aside, Min's art has actually been pretty helpful in answering quite a lot of my what-ifs and should-Is as a self-learner for pixel wizardry, because in my personal closet under the stairs, there's just no one to talk to about my personal artistic self-doubts. My favorite part of their style is their line art. Compared to a lot of the other artists' style, it is messier, it is less refined, there's no tapering everywhere, there's overlaps and do-overs. It sounds like I'm talking smack, but I absolutely love it. There is nothing but freedom in these lines. There's no, oh, I gotta do that curve 10 more times because it looks like I did it with a mouse. Missed the curve? You missed the connection somewhere? Whatever, just draw over it, you know, nothing but freedom. Anyways, with that said, I've just chosen to use a hard edge brush with a mostly consistent line width. I've also chosen to skip past some of the more insanely detailed areas, since that's not the focus here. Naturally, it is also pretty difficult to get all the hair looking the same. Honestly, I have no idea what is happening exactly, but I do think that that is the point. Moving onwards with the coloring, for the purpose of sharing this file, I wanted to keep all the layers as separate as possible. This is still doable with Min's style due to the fact that it still leans more heavily on the lines. If it was something more painterly like Silorenko, merging layers will almost be unavoidable to allow for some more blending goodness. But I digress. I've decided to split each area, if you will, into essentially the half that's lit directly by main light and the half that's not. And as you can see, I do love the lasso fill too quite a bit. I think that up till now, everything has been fairly straightforward. You do some sketching, the line art doesn't have anything too special. I realized later that that's not quite true, but at least in terms of syncing up with this video, say if you were to follow along, not much explanation is needed. Even the light and dark, you can think of it as just putting in separate colors on separate layers. But before we go into the rendering, just for reference, for each part, I start off with the base layers, then I intend to airbrush in some more colors based on the lighting situation in the scene, then I'll be doing the brushwork on some layers that'll be on top of everything. So I'll be using my screen recording from now on so you can see the brushes and layers and stuff. So with the main color blocking done, I just want to quickly do some light rendering for the background so it's not just flat, which is very distracting. As mentioned before, I started with just airbrushing in some colors based on the lighting. The latch upon which these props sit is getting some light from the main source, so we add some orange glow on these walls in the back as reflected light. The color choice depends on the light source and the object itself. There's a great series by Marco Bucci on this topic, which I remember watching but do not remember like 99% of the stuff. So what I did quite a lot during this study was just use a brush with some opacity settings, select the light and color, gently tap my pen at the area I want to add this color to, then pick that new color and repeat until I like what I see. This works well here because of the perfect reference, but when you do your own original work, you probably need either great references or enough experience to know what looks right. Anyways, here's the same thing for the color from the sky, and basically just rinse and repeat for the other parts as well. This is real-time footage, by the way, just to ground some expectations, because God knows mine is completely messed up by all the time-lapse everywhere. The part on the door here is a little brighter because of all the light that's bouncing around the area. Personally, if it were not for this being a study, I would have probably made it even brighter. I also did some quick rendering on the radio. Copying and pasting lines felt kinda cumbersome in my head, so I just decided to use one of my rake brushes to paint in some spaghetti, and then the same thing again for the erasure, and to turn them into tiny baby spaghettis. And with the background kinda in place, I went around all the other parts doing the same thing. For the areas directly under the main light, there isn't too much to do. The high intensity meant that the only gradients that are present are just some fall-offs, although I do feel like these are exaggerated as well since the light is presumably from the sun, and this slight increase in distance from the sun would probably not cause this much of a color fall-off, I think. There's also quite a bit of artistic liberty here, the more intense red and orange, as well as this salt bay tinge of violet. So speaking of this, I do believe Min quite likes to do this. Looking at some of the other pieces, there's often one specific color that's being emphasized, although not always as usual. Coming back to this, I think that that's probably why there's more red in these years, unless of course she has LEDs in them. Pretty sure that this is just to add more color variation, so there's no real rules on where to put it, but because these colors are so saturated, it will have to be done much more sparingly than the variations in the gray. Which, by the way, if you turn up the saturation, you can see just how many more hues are actually in the desaturated grays. Anyways, back to the gradients. There's a lot more happening in the shadows, as is usually the case, since the light source is ambient and much weaker, therefore allowing for more play. Here on Amiya's hair, you can see some blue up from the sky, some artistic reds, the darker areas almost seemingly implying that her hair is reflective and reflecting some of the roof. There is a beige-like glow around the face here. I would leave this till the rendering is done, as personally this specific gradient is usually added last. My understanding is that the hair is less thick around the face and therefore some color of the skin is coming through. Regardless of the reason though, it does make the two regions a little more harmonious, so I do like adding it. The clothing is more of the same, some sky blue, some reflected orange from the hand that's in the light, some more artistic reds. The violin is interesting in that there's a very distinct plane for the top which reflects a lot more blue from the sky. The strings are also very neatly and concisely represented by the simple colors. And that's basically kinda Amiya's side. On Ross' side is a lot simpler since it's all one color with her white hair and white dress. Regions in the light, just some color fall off again. Regions not in the light takes on the blue of the sky. Shadow regions near the light is much brighter due to all the reflection and scattering and gives the fabric a translucent feel. There's some skin color around the legs. Once again, I'm assuming is due to the translucent nature of the fabric. I can't really explain the colors being on the side of the dress as behind the legs though. And I also decide to skip the flowers because there are better ways to punish myself. Not that I should be punished. Anyways, I do not understand shoe. I cannot explain butt glow. At this point, I personally felt like a lot of distance to the goal have been covered, you know, like a the end is in sight kind of moment. But of course, there's still a long way to go. Rendering wise, we'll just be picking from the colors we've just placed, push it around, blend it some, etc, etc. In terms of this illustration, other than the one rake brush being used to add some textures here and there, it's basically just a normal hard edge brush with a little bit of blending and blurring. With the colors in there already, I feel like anyone can do this, but of course, there's basically no point in me making a video if I don't show my process, so I will, but just some of the more interesting parts. I do have the entire recording and I am okay with posting it, but it is over 700 minutes long, so I will hold off on choking out my GPU and internet unless there's enough interest. I'll probably add a comment if that end up happening. Can't read the future though, unfortunately, so let me know. How about if you're interested, not let me know that I've added a comment anyways. Before I channel my inner South Park Kyle and go, you know, I learned something today. Let me first summarize some points for the rendering, which is going to be out of chronological order. Point 1. There's still going to be colors missing from each part, especially in the grays where sometimes there's just more variations than is necessarily due to the lighting. In these cases, try sliding the hue around or picking a slightly more saturated or desaturated shade, and I do mean slightly. Don't feel like you can only use the colors you've already placed. It sounds so obvious when I say it out loud, but I'm the kind of person that will do something like that. Point 2. Get some texture brushes. In this case, you need a rake brush at least, like the ones with the little strands of spaghetti to make strokes like these, which by the way, Min just seems to use these sparingly and randomly for more details. I've also used some custom brushes to add in the texture here, and some for the background noise, which I'm assuming is actually from the rendering process of the 3D background, but I digress. Again, Point 3, and this ties back into the Marco Bucci series about colors. I remember learning about using grays for transition between colors, color temperatures, and all that, but this is the first time I truly got to experience something directly. A lot of the bluish tones that I thought I needed to pick the color blue for turns out to just be grays next to the intense orange and reds. Like Ross's lakes, and also as I mentioned before, the sky is like green. So that was pretty cool. Point 4, if you're like me and splitted the light and dark areas into the separate layers, there will be some overhead with messing around with the light edges. You can see that despite the clipping of layers down, I still have to use masks to ensure that certain adjustments only affected the light areas. These masks will have to be reapplied again if you decide to mess around with the edges of the light areas, such as blurring it more. So that's one downside with keeping all the layers separate. Point 5. There's more to Min's lines than I thought. So for example, while I did see the blue outline on the violin bow, I did not however notice these orange glows until I was nearly done and adding some colors to the lines. I thought that they were just the line art color, but it's clearly distinct. I end up using a new layer, drawing over it, then blurred and turned down the opacity, but it still felt kinda off. I don't think it's the JPEG compression artifacts, but there's no way to know without a higher res image. Point 6. 3D assets. Another thing I never noticed was that the background is most likely made using 3D or photos, but most likely 3D. Even now I'm still kinda doubtful, but there's no way they spend extra time in this other image just to render something here, almost photorealistically, just to blur it out later. I don't know, maybe they did, and I'm sure that they could if they wanted to. But my point is that compared to the other pieces I've seen where 3D is much more obvious, Min managed to blend it in so well that it took me a whole trip to Japan, 9 months of job hunting, and many failed interviews just to finally realize this fact. Alright, that's kinda all the stuff I wanted to talk about for rendering. Let's do a quick comparison. So obviously putting the two side by side makes it rather obvious which is which. Mine has some issues with values and shades, but still, finishing it felt good. It was one of the pieces from Min that I really liked, although I'm pretty sure I really like all of them just as much anyways. But as I said before, it took like a whole week's after work hours, and based on all the recording, there's about 730 minutes-ish, with about 30 to 40 of it getting corrupted when the power plug just decided to fall off the wall and send my computer's consciousness into the shadow realm. There is one major point that I'm kinda disappointed that I didn't see it at the time, is that the values on Amiya's head is too similar. As a focal point, her head should have been popped out more from the background. And regardless of how funny the colors look on my 10-year-old Wacom Cintiq, I should have spotted that. By the way, as I'm editing, I have to look at my study and the original repeatedly, and the differences in value really bothered me, so I took some time and added some multiply and screen layers just to bring it closer to the original. Anyways, if you're still watching this video, thank you for your time. I hope the video provided some positive value to your life that is worth however much time you've spent on it and all the other opportunity costs that were incurred. If so, leave a like, comment, sub if you want. I'll be trying to get into a routine for making and posting videos. Also in other news, I have recently, finally, started on creating entirely original illustrations for my own character and enjoyment. I have stories and concepts in my head planned, but since I have no intentions of spending even more ungodly amounts of time on how to draw manga, I'll be trying to deliver these stories through illustrations instead. I think Omi would be relieved to hear that I've finally found a bit more of a direction for my art. With AI taking over everywhere, I feel like having a story to tell that is personal and special to someone is one of the few ways human artists can compete with the co-efficiency of machines. Anyways, apologies for the less than cheerful ending. Check out the description for links to my social and of course for the data file for this study. I did my best to keep everything neat, so hopefully it's useful to at least one person. Stay warm, and I'll see you in the next one.